Today I am having an experience like no other, literally, because thanks to Kano sponsoring this video, I will be the first person in the world who gets to cover the Harry Potter Kano coding kit. In their own words, you will build a wand for yourself, learn to code, and you will, yes, this is a direct quote from the packaging, wave your coding wand.
My brothers, my sisters, my friends, the great gift of your applause is not for me, but for yourselves. Therefore, applaud yourselves. It has been said that I hate the non-mission, the Muggles, the nomads, the can't spell. I do not hate them. I do not. I say the Muggles are not lesser than other, not worthless, but of other value. Magic, blues of the rare soul. It is granted to those who live for higher things. Oh, what a world we would make for all of humanity. All of humanity, we who live for freedom, for truth. The moment has come to rise up and take our rightful place in the world.
The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll fail completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable have we any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen. But what about the city of the day after tomorrow? I think it will be completely different. In fact, I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough which has been made possible by developments in communications, particularly the transistor and, above all, the communications satellite. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London. When that time comes, the whole world will have shrunk to a point. In that world of the future, we will not be the only intelligent creatures. The most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men, they'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we are now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter. But even if the future does belong to the robots, our bodies and our brains still have immense untapped potentialities.
Beneath the complexities of everyday life, the rules of our universe seem reassuringly simple. This solid bridge supports my weight. The water flowing underneath always goes downhill. And when I throw this stone, it always flies through the air following a predictable path. But as scientists peered deep into the tiny building blocks of matter, all such certainty vanished. They found the weird world of quantum mechanics. Deep down inside everything we see around us, we found a universe completely unlike our own. To paraphrase one of the founders of quantum mechanics, everything we call real is made up of things that cannot be themselves regarded as real. Around 100 years ago, some of the world's greatest scientists began a journey down the rabbit hole into the strange and the bizarre. They found that in the realm of the very small, things could be in two places at once. That their fates are dictated by chance. And that reality itself defies all common sense. And at stake, that everything we thought we knew about the world might turn out to be completely wrong.
The scientists are the easiest people to fool. And there's a very good reason for this. Scientists study nature, and nature never cheats. But some people do. They bend the evidence. And that's something that scientists often forget.
Nature never cheats, but sometimes people do. Oh, the delicious irony of that quote. I just had to put that in there in light of everything I wanted to share here. That was, of course, Arthur C. Clarke in his later years. And the audio clips in the beginning intro there was him speaking in 1964, making predictions about the future. And what a future it is indeed, where the enthusiasm for magic and for technology seem to be greater than ever, and merging into one another in so many ways and so many examples. And this whole idea of how technology and science is essentially the Trojan horse for occult teachings and magic and mystical thinking just seems to be validated more and more every single day. That clip I just played of the physicist talking about the secrets of quantum physics and the world not being real like we thought it was and all that, that's Jim Al-Kalili. He's done a bunch of different documentaries and things on quantum physics, and I wanted to share this one that I found. I'm sure you noticed the crazy little flashes of the devil face in that little opening there. And it's from this hour-long episode where he's talking about the discovery of quantum physics. And, overall, if you're interested in this topic and how it relates to scientism and the Great Deception and, the things I'm constantly talking about on my channel, I definitely recommend checking out this one episode for a number of reasons. The first being that it actually does a pretty good job of just kind of breaking down in a very fast-paced way the progression of the whole history of quantum physics, starting out with Max Planck, and he gets into how the introduction of the light bulb into Germany prompted them to start exploring the photoelectric effect and how that led to further questions and quandaries. And then he gets into Einstein, and then how Einstein and Bohr sort of had this standoff for many years. And then after World War II, that whole kind of philosophical debate between the Einstein interpretation and the Copenhagen interpretation kind of was forgotten about. And they just started progressing with all this technology that allegedly came out of all the proven theories, but there never really was reconciled. And then he talks about John Bell and Bell's theorem, and how it was basically ignored for 10 years until the physicists from Berkeley, the hippies who saved physics, which I've talked about before, they discovered Bell's theorem and started popularizing it through all these New Age quantum mysticism books. So that in itself is a pretty good breakdown, just in terms of the chronology. But what was really fascinating was that in the second part, he gets into this analogy where he sets himself down with an actor wearing this devil's mask. And in order to illustrate the questions and the paradoxes that quantum physics has been grappling with, from Einstein to Bohr and then to John Bell, with things like the double slit experiment and the whole issue of particle wave duality, and is the observer himself actually creating the desired outcome, or is the outcome already existent before that? And all those questions that are still being kicked around and discussed today. But he uses this analogy of a card dealer, the quantum dealer, who ironically actually has the devil's face. It was just the most perfect irony that I think I've ever seen in relation to this whole topic. Because indeed, this is, oddly enough, really kind of depicting the premise that I've been exploring, or the question that I've been exploring when it comes to quantum physics, and how all these experiments that have been done are allegedly prompting these questions and these quandaries and these paradoxes, and showing that there's something crazy going on and all this stuff, whereby like one paradox just leads to another paradox, which leads to even weirder conclusions. And now here we are in 2018, and they're talking about building quantum computers, and yet the philosophical ramifications are still being, debated. And he actually talks about the question of the deck being rigged. Like when you do the experiment this way, you expect this result, and then you get the opposite result. And then you change the parameters of the experiment, thinking that you'll outsmart the dealer, and then you get a different response, time and time again. As if to say, like, it seems like the dealer, quote unquote, the particles that they're using in these experiments, like switch the decks. Like it's always rigged no matter what you do. And so ultimately they come to this conclusion that we're just faced with the quantum conundrum, and this whole idea of potentiality and superposition and quantum states and all these things that really, of course, lend themselves to interpretations that align very closely with mysticism and Eastern spirituality and occult spirituality. So that just kind of blew me away. The quantum dealer being represented as the devil. I was like, it's kind of one of those truth hidden in plain sight kind of things, where I'm not saying they did that intentionally, but that just kind of says it all right there. But the interesting thing is that as much as this whole topic might seem kind of superfluous and just fringy, and what does this actually have to do with practical life, and especially the Christian life, which should be our concern as followers of Jesus? How does this whole topic really relate to matters of faith and just our everyday lives, in the day that we're living? And recently I just came across a really shocking example of how this absolutely is bleeding into the quote-unquote everyday world, and into the church, and into the pulpit. Somebody sent me a link to this message done by Doug Hamp talking about rethinking prayer on quantum physics and neuroplasticity and all these things. And it's like a 3-hour presentation, so it was difficult to listen to, but I forced myself to do it, and I was just stunned. And obviously Doug Hamp, there have been other things that I've disagreed with him. Obviously he's done nothing but scoff at flat earth and try and refute it in the past, and not very successfully in my opinion. But it is crazy how the cosmology debate really is more about the questions of where legitimate science ends and the occult-based pseudoscience begins, and being willing to ask those difficult questions and to pursue it as far as you need to pursue it, as far as the evidence might suggest, like how pervasive the deception really goes in terms of what is earthly physics and what is heavenly metaphysics. And, when you conflate the two, it sort of sets the stage for all kinds of deception. And so out of this 3-hour presentation that Doug Hamp gives, the first hour is really just talking all about all the same stuff that you just heard about, how reality is super weird when you get down to the quantum level, and it's not even logical and everything, but it's genuine science and it's been proven, and he says it over and over again. And here's just a few kind of highlights just to kind of show you how convinced he is that this is just rock solid science that has nothing to do with mystical woo-woo or new age stuff. I mean, he's adamant.
Einstein said there is no matter. This is that famous theorem E equals mc squared. He said concerning matter, we have all been wrong. What we have called matter is energy. So this, energy, this little thing, energy. It's all energy. The chair you're sitting in right now is energy. He says there is no matter. Energy can become mass and vice versa. So again, I told you you'd have to rethink how we look at the world. And sometimes we let all this stuff just remain kind of this pseudo-science fantasy stuff, but this isn't fantasy. This is not science fiction. This is real, proven, tested kind of stuff. One of my favorite is Niels Bohr. He's a Danish physicist. He's a pioneering researcher in atomic structure and quantum theory. He's one of the original leaders of quantum physics. And he said that everything that we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. Now again, he's not some guru sitting on top of a mountain somewhere. He's thoroughly based in quantum physics, in real physics, things that are testable. Are you serious, Doug? I mean, is this really what the world is like? Yes. And you should feel dizzy after you're hearing some of these things because they seem so outlandish. They truly do seem like science fiction, like something we would see in Star Wars or something like that. But what we see is this is what scientist after scientist has explained, that this is how the world is. So you might say, well, this isn't logical. Well, that's okay. It doesn't have to be logical. Don't worry about the logic. Don't try to be logical as we look through these things. Because look, a guy walking on water is not logical, right? Max Planck, he's considered the father of quantum physics. He said, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. So matter, this kind of stuff, is a derivative. That means it comes out of consciousness. Now this is what the Bible has already told us. In the beginning, God, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said. And so the Bible has already beat scientists to the punch that, well, of course, God, the great mind, the consciousness, as it were, he spoke and matter came into existence. So God was already there. And he goes on to say, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about the atoms this much. There is no matter as such. There is no matter. This is a no-nonsense kind of guy. I'm not quoting, guys that are contemplating their navel all day. These are people who are in the thick of physical research. Think of a video game where maybe you're driving a car or something, and in the video game you're going around a corner. What's around the corner? Nothing, right? It only comes into existence as you turn the corner. That's essentially what we're saying. These things go from being in a state of potentialities, of possibility. It's like this big cloud and nothing is really there, nothing is firm, until we look at it, and then it goes from being a potential to being an actual substance. It collapses into a particular thing. And again, this is what physicist after physicist is telling us. And I want you to understand that I'm only quoting the most relevant and salient physicists out there. I'm not getting the guys that are off in the fringe, but these are the big names. Wolfgang Pauli. According to quantum physics, the observer has indeed a new relation to the physical events around him in comparison with the classical observer, Newtonian physics, who is merely a spectator. Eugene Wigner. The laws of quantum mechanics itself cannot be formulated without recourse to the concept of consciousness. So in order for things to go from being in a state of potentialities to being in a state of a particular thing, we need an observer. We have to have the observer. R.C. Henry says that observer creates the reality. And he is a professor at Johns Hopkins University. He says a fundamental conclusion of the new physics also acknowledges that the observer creates the reality. As observers, we are personally involved with the creation of our own reality. Physicists are being forced to admit that the universe is a mental construction. The observer creates the reality. Again, I'm just going to keep stressing this, that I'm not pulling these off of some new age website. These are guys who are doing real quantum physics, and this experiment of the double slit has been performed thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times. This is real science. It's real observations.
But yeah, never mind the fact that Niels Bohr was absolutely a mystic and Einstein was potentially influenced by Kabbalism. Wolfgang Pauli was an absolute occultist. I mean, to the fact where he experienced poltergeists for a lot of his life and things like that. And all these guys. So all it really takes is to do a little bit of research to realize that the fingerprints of occultism and Hermeticism are all over this topic, are all over science, going all the way back to Francis Bacon in the beginning, of course. But if you refuse to really take that research seriously, or you refuse to look, then this is where we see people ending up. But the disturbing thing isn't just that he's gulping down all this alleged scientific theory. It's really the way that he then applies it to the whole topic of prayer that was actually profoundly disturbing. And I don't know how else to say it, because essentially, in a nutshell, what he's saying about prayer is that prayer is not something whereby we go to God and we ask, we present our requests to God, and if God is going to answer them yes or no, that's his will and he'll decide. But he uses the phrase, we shouldn't go crawling to God like beggars, but basically that we should just behave as if it's already happened. And that's his understanding of faith, that it's just total confidence and total assurance. And he gets all into Peter stepping out of the boat and kind of just tortures that whole section of scripture really beyond what it really teaches and what it really says about faith and everything. And it just grieved me to listen to the whole thing, because ultimately what I walked away hearing is that he's basically using the Bible, and I'm not saying he's doing this on purpose or knowingly, that's kind of the whole point, but ultimately what he's coming away with is he's teaching concepts straight out of Hermeticism, namely like the law of attraction. He actually goes so far as to say that, you can use prayer, like prayer to God, godly prayer supposedly, you can use it for good or for bad. And you can use it to attract good in your life or attract bad in your life. That's the law of attraction. This is straight out of the Kabbalion, and Kabbalah, the whole idea that the great mind, the cosmic mind, spoke the universe into existence. This is Hermeticism through and through. This is not biblical theology. This is not a biblical understanding of prayer. I mean, this is actually really just sort of the word of faith teaching that's been around forever, kind of just being presented in a new, supposedly scientific way. But the Bible tells us, don't say, I will go here or go there and do this or that and do business and make money. But if God wills it, then I will go here and go there. We're supposed to bring our requests to God. They are requests. God can say no. This whole idea of, it's just the power of positive thinking, really, that he's adopting. This whole teaching that's been around for years and years now. The power of your intentions, the power of mind over matter, really. But you're trying to Christianize it and trying to package it in such a way that it's palatable to our sort of Christian lexicon. And so this is when it starts to get really serious now, because now we're talking about just really corrupted theology, false teaching, infecting preaching and infecting churches that can be directly traced to concepts that are coming from the quote-unquote science of quantum physics. So it's a pretty startling example, and I think this is becoming more common amongst Christians who want to kind of show that, science is just now catching up with what God has said all along, when in reality, what science is actually doing is reintroducing the world to a whole host of concepts and belief systems and attitudes that are not from God at all, but are all from the fallen one, and all feed into the new coming one world religion that is everywhere you turn nowadays, whether it's at Comic-Con or the TED Talks or, the Joe Rogan podcast or whatever. It's everywhere you turn nowadays. So these things do matter. Truth matters on every level. And sometimes we have to be able to step back and kind of see the progression, to appreciate just kind of how all these things tie together and where they're all going to this sort of end goal of one world techno-shamanism. I mean, that's a term that you hear being used nowadays, techno-shamanism. And there's a lot of Christians out there, because of their unwillingness to question the holy halls of science when it comes to things like physics or astronomy or the scientific revolution. Sure, we can question Darwinism and evolution, but it's a very small box. And then everything else is just, you blindly accept it. You won't open it up and really look at the nuts and bolts of what is being said, and where maybe the alleged scientific proof isn't quite as undeniable as they all want to insist. And that's why the whole topic of, the luminaries and electromagnetism, and how, this assumption, this philosophical assumption that stems all the way back from the Copernican principle, which basically started this whole thing, is what laid the groundwork for this assumption that light and energy are elements or part of the creation that we can just break down and put into a formula and eventually come to completely understand in a mechanistic way. For me, it is that philosophical assumption is what so much of this deception is predicated upon. That's how it supposedly leads to the quote-unquote paradox of, is it a particle or is it a wave? And we got to figure that out. Well, the deck has been rigged, in my opinion. The quote-unquote quantum dealer is using sleight of hand in a way that nobody will suspect, because they assume that the electromagnetic spectrum and light and all these things are just somehow properties of physics that is within our purview, when perhaps it's not. So now we come to believe that matter is energy and energy is matter, and that once you're there, that's monism, man. You are being primed for a scientistic worldview that is just straight out of Mystery Babylon without even realizing it. So hopefully that made sense. Thanks for watching. God bless. Talk to you next time.